Hello, and welcome to The Excerpt. I'm Dana Taylor. The skyrocketing cost of college leaves many with crushing debt that can take years, if not decades, to pay off. And while having a degree can open some doors, the burden of paying off student loans can end up closing other doors in life, like buying a house or having children. Another perspective is that, unlike 20 years ago, many employers, including high-profile ones like Apple, Google, and Ernst Young, have eliminated the degree requirements for many jobs, which leads many prospective students to wonder, is college really worth it? Our guest today, Ben Wildavsky, argues in his new book, The Career Arts, Making the Most of College, Credentials, and Connections, that the answer is most assuredly yes. Ben, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
Okay, so let's dive right in. With the price of tuition so high and with so many employers now creating a career path for those who choose to forgo a degree and just start work right away, some would argue that college isn't actually worth it anymore. You disagree. Why is that?
Look, I think it's very understandable that people have some concern about college value. It's a big investment. The fact is, the evidence is very clear that people who earn college degrees on average have about a 70% higher earnings than people who only have a high school diploma. There is a lot of talk about focusing more on skills and hiring for skills, not degrees. But the fact is, if you look at what employers actually do, and not just what they're saying, what they're doing is having a strong preference for hiring people with degrees.
Okay, so let's look at this from the opposite perspective. Many others think that first you go to college and get your degree, then get the job you want. In your book, you call that trade-off between going to college and getting practical job skills a widespread and misleading notion. Why is that?
I really think it's a false choice. And the reason is that, if you look at what employers are looking for, what's really needed for career success over the long term, we're all living longer, we can have multiple jobs. People really need a mixture of broad skills and targeted skills. So if you do it right, you go to college, you're often going to get, those, what they always talk about is the critical thinking skills, the analytical skills. Some people will ask you to take gen ed classes, but you also will often have majors like teaching, nursing, computer science. They're really very practical. And so you end up with that mixture that helps you navigate a career.
Well, you've done some research here as to the value of a degree. What kind of research did you do, and what does it say about the value of getting a degree?
I talk to a lot of economists. I'm not an academically trained economist myself, but I feel like they have a lot of good data. They have a lot of good perspective. And there's just been evidence, really going back to, the 1970s when far fewer people were going to college, that the so-called wage premium, the advantage of going to college has just gotten higher and higher. It's leveled off in the past 15 or 20 years. But what's interesting is that even as more people have gotten degrees, we're now at a record percentage of the population with four-year degrees, about 37, 38%. The wage premium is also at very close to an all-time high. So it hasn't gotten less. It's really just extremely high compared to back in the 70s or 80s.
Well, do you think that parents and students are realistic about what college really offers? Are they prepared?
A lot of times when people say fewer people should go to college, they're not talking about their own children. They kind of want someone else's kids to make that choice. And I think that's very problematic. Going to college is not always a magic ticket to success. You really do need to be aware of those things I've mentioned, the broad skills, the targeted skills, and also having networks, having what they call social capital to make sure that the skills that you have developed, whether it's in college or whether it's in some other way, whether you know people who can vouch for you, who can talk about your abilities, and who can really tell you about what jobs are available. Those three things are really what it takes to get ahead.
Well, are there other kinds of credentials, though, or trainings that you think people should consider instead of college?
We have this stereotype of a college student as an 18-year-old who, puts everything aside for 4 years and pays a bunch of money and goes off to some, cloistered ivory tower. But that isn't really the reality for many people. There are a lot of people who are older students. Maybe they're working, they have families. They may go to school part-time. If they're fortunate, they work for one of the growing number of employers who provides education benefits. So those let you do your job, support yourself and your family, but also to gradually get some college credits. And I think it's really good if we encourage people to do more of that and to build up their skills. And eventually, some of those may lead to degrees, or they may just lead to better job opportunities over time. I think that the key thing is to really take seriously this idea of being a lifelong learner.
Okay, Ben, I want to talk about community college. Number one, they're usually much more affordable than state colleges and private universities. What's your perspective on them?
Look, I'm a big fan of community colleges. They are, as they're a very large percentage of undergraduates are at community colleges. It's something like 30 or 35% of the total. Community college is college, and I think that uh, it has great potential. The challenge is that that potential is not always realized. There are a lot of people who enroll in community college, planning to do a couple of years there and then transfer to four-year schools to get a degree, and a lot of them don't end up doing that. It's really quite a modest percentage, maybe 15, 17%. And I think that there needs to be a lot more work done to improve the transfer process to make it smoother. We don't want people having to spend money or spend time at community college and then not have their credits transfer. That's a big concern for some students.
Okay, but for people who simply can't afford to go to college, even with loans, what are some of the best alternatives?
There's a whole bunch of programs. There's a program called Year Up, which has been very effective, name comes from the fact that it's 1 year where it's a mixture of about 6 months of fairly focused skills training, also learning sort of general professional job skills, but then 6 months of a paid internship for a company, which really prepares you to get into the workforce. Those kinds of programs are very effective because they're looking at in-demand sectors. And really what they're trying to do is create a pathway where you can get a job. Maybe you can keep on learning. Maybe you can take community college classes. It's not a separate decision from getting education and degrees, but it gets you some work experience and some income much faster, which is what a lot of people want.
A lot of employers now offer education benefits. Is that a reasonable route for some people to take to get an education?
Absolutely. I mean, I just don't see the downside. I think the real question is, what are you going to do? I talked to a woman who helped run the Amazon Career Choice Program, which is one of the very, very large employers, of course, and it's a very big program. And she just talked about how they really encourage people. First of all, they make the classes very accessible. They will even, for frontline workers, they'll even put classroom space in a warehouse so people, when their shift is over, they can take a class, or before their shift. They really try to make it accessible so it works around people's lives, because, people's lives are complicated. As I said before, they have jobs, they have kids. They can't just drop everything and go off to a four-year college in many cases. But what you want to avoid is what she called cul-de-sac jobs. You want to avoid a kind of certificate or a preparation that leads you to maybe a slightly better job, but that doesn't have a lot of a pathway, doesn't have advancement opportunities. You don't want to be at a dead end. You want to have something where you can keep on learning and keep on growing and also make more money.
In the course of writing this book, what did you find that colleges and universities do right? And where do you think they struggle the most?
Gosh, well, big question. I mean, look, I have, I suppose, like a lot of people, I have maybe a bit of a love-hate relationship with American higher education, mostly love. I mean, because I do think that higher education is still much more of a gateway to opportunity than it is a barrier. Colleges have gotten much better about seeing that their job is to help students succeed and to support students to get them to graduation. There used to be a little bit of this kind of boot camp mentality of, when you're a first year student, look to your left, look to your right, and, one of you is not going to be here. And, by graduation, they no longer consider that a point of pride. They really want to help students succeed. So that's on the good side. On the other side, look, we still have a very poor completion rate. Only 62% of first-time, full-time students at a given college will graduate from that same college within 6 years. So we really need to improve the graduation rates. Students need a lot more support. There's obviously the issues of costs as well. I think there's a lot of things that colleges could do better, especially with what I would call navigation assistance, helping people just kind of make it through the system.
Well, in the book, you talk about the value of social capital. I know you touched on this, but what is it and why is it so important in your view?
The simpler term would be to talk about building and accessing networks. There are people who, just because of the accident of their birth, they may have a lot of inherited advantages. And that might include networks where, if you're a college student or you're looking for a summer job and one of your parents knows somebody who can help get you a job. You certainly have a network if you're from a more modest background, maybe from a low income background, but you need to really focus on how to build that so that you can find out about opportunities. And that so you can do things like part-time jobs, internships, apprenticeships, where people get to know you and they see what you can do and they can vouch for you. And that's the kind of thing that it really takes to build up a career over time. There was a wonderful article, gosh, it's 50 years ago, called The Strength of Weak Ties. And it was a sociologist who interviewed a lot of men in the Boston suburbs about how they found their jobs. And he would always ask them, so did you find out your job from one of your good buddies? And they would tell him over and over again, oh no, it was kind of more of an acquaintance, just someone they knew casually. So this is where he came up with the idea of weak ties being important. And that's your network. It's not just your close friends. It's not just your family. It's the people that you make a point of getting to know who can be really important information sources as you're trying to build your career.
Well, do you think that the workplace of the future is likely to involve more job and career changes than in the past? And how does a college education play into that?
We are living longer. The retirement age has been raised, and we are more likely to have multiple jobs. Already, I believe it's something like 11 or 12 job changes is pretty standard, and that's going to only grow. And, college it's really this whole notion of transferable skills. The idea that, yeah, it's great to know the computer language of the moment, but look, when I was in college, back in the dark ages, I took an intro computer class in a language called BASIC. Well, guess what? I'm sure that 4 or 5 years later, nobody was using BASIC anymore. The computer language changes, so it's definitely a useful thing to know, and it's what your employer needs right now. But what you need is to be able to kind of navigate change, and you need to be able to learn new things. You also need to be able to do things like work with other people, communicate in writing, communicate verbally, be part of a team. Those are all things that help you navigate many job changes over a career.
Okay, so tell me, what surprised you the most when you were researching this book?
I think it would have to be the social capital piece, because I think like a lot of people, I had been a writer and a journalist for years, writing about education, thinking about what happens on college campus and not really drawing the connection so much to how networks help you build careers.
And then finally, what's the most important thing that you'd want people listening to take away from this interview?
I think it comes down to like trying to avoid that sort of either or thinking. The idea that, there was a kind of an old line from some presidential debate, you're going to be a philosopher but we need more welders. The idea that there's a big stark divide between practicality and education. The fact is, it's not either or, it's both and. And I think we have to really take charge of our own learning. And it might be college right away for many people. I think that's a great choice, but it might also be developing skills, both targeted and broad skills and networks over time. And that combination is what's really going to help you get ahead in your career.
Well, the book is called The Career Arts, Making the Most of College, Credentials, and Connections, and it's on bookshelves now. Ben, thanks so much for sharing your insights with us today.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. It was a great conversation.
Thanks for watching. I'm Dana Taylor. I'll see you next time.